Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Friday, April 7, 2017. Not going to do a Facebook Live video feed today. Your humble host is under the weather a little bit. And I'm going to preserve my voice and address it with a little scotch over the weekend. Got a lot to talk about today as America's truth emergency widens. Based on flimsy, if any, evidence, Donald Trump responded emotionally because he watched television news and saw the gruesome pictures of babies and adults in the town in Syria that reportedly suffered a chemical incident on Tuesday. Yes, in less than 72 hours, the president made some quick decisions and launched about 60 cruise missiles from American naval vessels offshore into a Syrian airbase that the U.S. claims was where the gas attacks were launched from on Syrian aircraft. Now, we haven't seen any evidence of this, and no critics, nobody who is suspicious of the story or who is demanding proof, is given any airtime or ink in the corporate media right now, except when their concerns are dismissed. And for example, yesterday I talked about the Washington Post story about Congressman Tom Massey of Kentucky, a Republican libertarian, and a guy who says, hey, we don't have evidence that the Syrian government was responsible, and it doesn't seem rational that Assad would do that at this point in time. But those concerns are swept away as the corporate media responded to this attack by Trump by playing it like we're back in 2003. The Rent-A-Generals were on deck to provide expert commentary and to cheer on the American assault. Rachel Maddow made way for Brian Williams, who's being rehabilitated as a news anchor, so that he could offer a bunch of musings about what he thought had happened after the cruise missiles dropped on that airbase. It was a bizarre spectacle. And while some voices were permitted to talk about details and disagree about war powers and other issues, the media and Beltway consensus on this is really troubling. And that's why I call it a truth emergency. Because at some point we might have evidence that Syria was actually responsible for this. But at this point, Syria denies it, Russia denies it, and the U.S. and its Western allies are in general agreement. The other voice I would have liked to have heard on television last night was that of Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii who served in Iraq and who has been a sharp critic, first of Obama and now, I think, of Trump regarding our policies in Syria. So Trump gave one of those bad teleprompter speeches. He was in Florida, and as we'll get to in a moment, this overshadowed his first summit with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And Trump, the hypocrite, he said it was a slow and brutal death because of this gas attack. It choked out the life of innocent men, women, and children. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror. Now, I will agree that chemical weapons are barbaric, and it's a horrible way to die. But at least 4 children are reported dead at the airbase that we struck with cruise missiles last night. And are those babies less beautiful than the ones who Trump says were cruelly murdered in a barbaric attack? And this is where the false sense of outrage that pervades so much of this whole episode is deeply frustrating. And, I feel compelled to tell you as I compare, one form of death to another, that, it shocks the senses when chemical weapons are used. But a cruise missile kills a beautiful baby just as much as a chemical weapon does. And when you look at the whiplash politics, the policy reversal of the last week, there was a concerted effort by the Trump administration using multiple spokespeople, Spicer, Tillerson, and others, including Nikki Haley at the United Nations, saying, we're not going to really insist on Assad stepping down. We don't want to create a power vacuum there. And you may know on Monday I led my news and comment podcast with rare agreement with Trump Co. on that issue. But all it takes to change Trump is something on Fox News that he recognizes is shocking and appalling to the average American. And then he feels compelled to be the big dick on the case and show just how strong and tough he can be. And it was Bill Clinton who said way back there in the 90s that Americans prefer strong even when you're wrong. I'm mangling the phrase that he used, but you get the gist of it. So the idea that the United States had to act because beautiful babies were cruelly killed in a barbaric attack just skirts so much. Even if we just look at Trump, and I'm not absolving Obama from responsibility either, or Bush for that matter. But if you just look at the first 77 days of the Trump administration, we've killed people in Yemen. We conducted air raids in Mosul, where hundreds of innocent people were killed. And it's a murky picture. I've covered that it appears that it was Iraqi forces that called in that American airstrike. But the idea that all of a sudden, after hundreds of thousands of people in Syria have been killed, after millions have been displaced, all of a sudden we have this emotional capacity and deep compassion for the brutal killing of women and children? And Americans just lap it up. The media serves it like one of those, desserts that is laced with high fructose corn syrup. It's just amazing. So Russia is reacting. The Kremlin has denounced Trump's use of force and indicated that they may withdraw from the hotline system that we've set up to prevent American air assets from colliding with or sharing airspace with or somehow getting into a confrontation with Russian or Syrian air assets. So the U.S. did, in fact, give a warning to Russia on that hotline some 60 or 90 minutes in advance. And many people interpret that as, well, if you tell the Russians, they told the Syrians, so they could reduce the level of damage by getting people and assets away from that airbase before the missiles struck. And, of course, Trump likes to talk about how he doesn't telegraph his plans in advance, but he did just that on Air Force One as he was flying to Florida yesterday. And Rexon Tillerson, who's playing Secretary of State these days, he has reversed position faster than Who Shot Bob. And he blames Russia for failing to enforce the 2013 agreement that it brokered to help Syria eliminate all of its chemical weapons. Now, the U.S. has also, John Kerry has said, that they certified that all those chemical weapons were removed and destroyed on an American special ship in the Mediterranean. Syria also has condemned the American strike as a disgraceful act. Assad issued a statement saying that the cruise missile strike was the result of a false propaganda campaign. Syria has denied that it currently possesses chemical weapons. Now, I don't consider Assad to be a credible person. But Americans are so conditioned to reject anything that Assad says because he's running a regime, he's a dictator, and he is a real dark figure. There's just no two ways about it. But consider this, that 3 or 4 weeks before the U.S. launched its invasion, the shock and awe campaign in Iraq in 2003, Dan Rather, the former CBS anchor, went to Baghdad, interviewed Saddam Hussein, the last interview that he gave to a Western outlet before we invaded. He asked Saddam point blank, "Do you have weapons of mass destruction?" And Saddam said no. And Saddam was telling the truth. But we didn't believe him because we had turned him into a cartoon figure, a supervillain, and nothing he said could be believed. Now, there's a 50-50 chance that Assad is telling the truth about this. But lacking evidence, we nonetheless have pell-mell fallen into or stepped into what I consider to be a red line trap. And we are seeing that allies support this. Germany and France had careful statements saying that Assad bears sole responsibility for the chemical weapons incident and inferring that they support Trump's move. President of Turkey Erdogan said that the American strikes are a positive response to war crimes in Syria. Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel said he hoped the action would resonate not only in Damascus but in Tehran, Pyongyang, and elsewhere. He loves to do that kind of stuff. And so we are left, once again, with the West ganging up on the Middle East and, in this case, by implication, on Russia. And I don't believe that the Trump administration properly evaluated the risks. And one thing I'll say about Obama is that he showed great restraint. And I agree with the restraint he showed. And Hillary Clinton was yesterday on stage in New York talking to a group of 3,000 women, again advancing her hawkish views that the chemical weapons incident requires a response from the United States. And it was Trump who said that Hillary wanted to attack Syria, then it would get us into World War III. So we can't believe any of the things that these people have said. Now, Tillerson, our, again, playing Secretary of State, he said, a week ago that essentially Assad could stay. But yesterday, when asked if Assad had to leave power, Sean Spicer kind of split the difference and said, well, at a minimum, Assad has to agree to abide by agreements not to use chemical weapons. But he didn't say what, if any, further U.S. objectives in Syria might be. Now, the threat of Russia to disconnect the hotline, it appears to be unclear because there are reports that it's been used 2 or 3 times today already. So we'll see if that threat is actually acted upon by Moscow. But now let's look at some of the people who are supporting this, because I think it helps us define the hawks and the neocons in government and in media. Dianne Feinstein, my senior senator from California, I fully support a robust U.S. role in ending the Syrian civil war as soon as possible, calling on Trump to develop a comprehensive strategy to end Syria's civil war. By definition, a civil war is only resolved when the internal parties in a nation come to terms or exhaust themselves. The idea of entering a civil war is ludicrous. And that's where we are. Fareed Zakaria, he's a hawk, and he's a neocon. He said on CNN that Donald Trump became president last night by taking this military action. Fareed, I think, didn't he say that on the night of the, almost State of the Union address, too? Brian Williams, working on his anchor rehabilitation campaign over on MSDNC. It was really weird. He described the Pentagon footage of the airstrike as beautiful pictures of fearsome armaments. And this is the mode of our media. When America goes to war, our media becomes just a group of cheerleaders, nationalistic, jingoistic. It's just so disgusting. It's not journalism. And there was very little criticism of Donald Trump last night. He was given great deference and respect for taking this huge decision to make this assault. Chuck Schumer, fresh from the Supreme Court confirmation wars, got on board, making sure Assad knows that when he commits such despicable atrocities, he will pay a price is the right thing to do. Dick Durbin, senator from Illinois, number 2 in the Democratic ranks there. My preliminary briefing by the White House indicated this was a measured response to the Syrian nerve gas atrocity. Again, it's not alleged, it's not reported. Nobody demands that we find facts. It's shoot first, and who cares when you ask the questions. And here's a bizarre response from Jim Woolsey. He was in the news recently because he made Mike Flynn look crazier than he is about that meeting last September where Flynn wanted Woolsey to help his Turkish buddies to kidnap Fethullah Gulen and return him to Turkey. Well, Woolsey said, Assad is kind of Iran's poodle in this whole world, and I think it'd be really important to plan a major military strike against the parts of the Iranian infrastructure that are headed toward nuclear weapons. What? Now, we move from this chemical incident that is blamed on the Syrian military and personally on Bashar al-Assad to an attack on Iranian infrastructure headed toward nuclear weapons. Now, unless the inspectors have information that I haven't heard about, there is no current Iranian nuclear weapons program. And Woolsey joins the reckless members of the Trump administration in calling for a unilateral attack on Iran? These people are mad. One of the other insidious developments that we're seeing is all of the media accounts treat the chemical weapons incident in the Damascus suburb of Ghouta in 2013 now as a matter of fact that it was caused by the Syrian government. And forensic studies have shown that the original claim that it was on a missile launched from a Syrian military base in Damascus proved to be false. And yet, this is one of those issues that was a controversy, but it has now been resolved without any adjudication. It's just consensus that, oh yeah, Assad used chemical weapons in 2013. Now, at that time, McConnell broke ranks with other congressional leaders who supported a strike on Syria, saying that Assad's chemical weapons use does not present a national security risk to the United States. But that is exactly what Trump invoked as his rationale when he gave that weird little talk from Florida last night. And today, Mitch McConnell, I support both the action and the objective. In the days ahead, I'm committed to working with the administration to continue developing a counter-ISIL strategy that hastens the defeat of ISIL and establishes objectives for dealing with the Assad regime in a manner that preserves the institutions of government in an effort to prevent a failed state. You decide what that means. Now, over on the alt-right, people who believed Trump when he said that he would not engage in wars for regime change, well, they're a little bit pissed with their boy. Paul Joseph Watson over at InfoWars said that Trump is just another deep state neocon puppet. I'm officially off the Trump train. I'm sure that's a shock. Richard Spencer, the white nationalist, said that he condemned the attack and says he'll support Tulsi Gabbard. I don't think she's racist enough for him, though. He says he'll support her for president in 2020. Laura Ingraham, conservative commentator, noted that the strike brought together three frequent critics of the president, Marco Rubio, John McCain, and Hillary Clinton. She said in a tweet, missiles flying, Rubio's happy, McCain ecstatic, Hillary's on board. A complete policy change in 48 hours. And I have rarely agreed with Laura Ingraham, but in this case I do. Even Scott Adams, the cartoonist who does Dilbert, wrote on his blog, even before the strike, that the chemical weapons attack was a manufactured event. And the New York Times does this. They say some of those supporters claimed, without evidence, that the chemical weapons attack was a hoax carried out by the deep state. Well, I don't know that. It could be a hoax. It could be a false flag attack. It could be the weapons cache of the rebels hit by a bomb of the Syrians. Those are possibilities. But the bottom line is here that those who are sweeping away any skeptics don't have any proof either. They have circumstantial evidence. And because Saddam, I'm sorry, we'll leave that Freudian slip in, because Assad has such a, dark reputation, it's easier for people to be propagandized. And it's working. Over at the United Nations Security Council, Bolivia has a short-term seat. And the ambassador of Bolivia, Sasha Sergio Llorente Solis, has vigorously disputed Nikki Haley's claim that the Syrian regime is responsible. And he is calling for an emergency meeting of the Security Council. He said the American strikes violated international law, and he criticized the U.S. for rebuffing efforts to negotiate a Security Council resolution to back an independent investigation into the chemical attacks. He accused the U.S. of acting as attorney, judge, and executioner. And he's right. Now, this is a little complicated because, of course, as I mentioned, China's leader, Xi Jinping, arrived in Florida for his visit, a Gulf-free weekend with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And one has to ask, was the timing of this intended to impress and or intimidate the Chinese leader? Because the missiles were flying almost at the same moment that Trump was staging the photo op with the Chinese president and their wives at some portal there at Mar-a-Lago. So China doesn't like U.S. Unilateral military action in Syria. It has provided vetoes at the Security Council in support of Syria over the last few years. And it may, so far, I haven't seen any reports of Xi Jinping actually discussing this with Trump. And I have to wonder, there's been a lot of speculation about Donald Trump's junk, and the fact that his small hands suggest that his sexual organs aren't that big either. And frankly, I don't care. But if I can just extend that joke a little bit, as I was watching TV last night and all these people gushing over how, Trump was decisive and took action and, responded to these ghoulish Syrians, I imagine that they had to call in the doctors because he had a stiffy that lasted more than 4 hours. Now, one of the voices that I heard on television last night, it was Adam Schiff, the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, and now a pretty prominent Democrat because of the whole Trump-Russia investigation. He was on MSDNC, and he reliably said that he supported the strike, but I was pleased to hear him raise issues about war powers. And he did the same with Obama. He tried to get the House to pass a resolution to authorize the president to take military action in Syria instead of allowing it to just be an extension of presidential power. And I fully agree with that. And it does appear that Trump did not have the authority to launch this strike. But it doesn't matter in America anymore because our Congress doesn't assert its constitutional authority to authorize military action. And yet we see that the Constitution is trampled once again and that nobody really seems to care. Back in 2013, Mad Dog Mattis, who is now the defense secretary who carried out the orders of Trump last night, well, he had some pretty strong comments regarding that red line and the, reports of Syrian responsibility for the chemical weapon outside Damascus. And he said at the time to Wolf Blitzer, on Syria, we're going to have to determine what is the end state we want. This war needs to be ended as rapidly as possible. That's the bottom line. But if the Americans go in, if the Americans take leadership, if the Americans take ownership of this, it's going to be a full-throated, very, very serious war. And anyone who says this is going to be easy, that we can do a no-fly zone and it'll be cheap, I discount that on the outset. So we have all of these people who had positions that don't matter anymore because Trump saw some beautiful babies brutally gassed on his TV set. And here's bizarre and biased reporting. The New York Times and The Guardian from Britain both today ran lengthy pieces that are based on examining the motives of Bashar al-Assad in, from their point of view, authorizing this chemical weapons usage. And I'll link to these and you can read them for yourselves, but it's just bizarre because the arguments that they raise are simply to recite the history. And then they say, well, this is consistent with that history. But the timing of this, as Congressman Tom Massey and others have raised, is really a head-scratcher because Assad appears to be winning the war. Last week, he got the Trump administration to say that it's not their goal to take him out. Why would he screw that up by taking this step? Some people say that he was emboldened. These articles suggest he was emboldened by that coordinated announcement from the Trump administration. And I simply don't buy that. Then there's this Guardian editorial that infers that they support the use of American force over this chemical incident. But then they go on to really raise a lot of important issues. The uncertainty is supercharged by the fact that the attack was ordered by Trump, a volatile narcissist without a coherent worldview, moral compass, or significant attention span, who loudly urged Obama not to take action back in 2013. Emboldened by the indifference to his campaign of terror, his troops now appear to have used sarin again. A president facing historically low poll ratings will probably see a boost. Military action is usually popular, in the short term at least. U.S. allies were already concerned he might be looking for a fight, maybe with Kim Jong-un. A man who likes to boast of decisiveness, but with little to show for 11 weeks in office, ordered action that could not be blocked by Congress or the courts. Trump's inconsistency and amorality are epitomized by his attempts to bar Syrian refugees. It's about time somebody mentioned that. Glenn Greenwald wrote a lengthy piece, more than 25 pages, at The Intercept today, an epic instant analysis piece where he makes 10 more major points, and I will link to it and you can read it when you have the time to do so. But I generally agree with his analysis. And one of the things that he points out is that Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau yesterday urged an investigation before any action is taken. But after the bombs fell, he contradicted his earlier statements, saying President Assad's use of chemical weapons and the crimes the Syrian regime has committed against its own people cannot be ignored. Is this a case of bad timing or taking an opportunity while the leader of China is in the United States? The new strongman in Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, has done a 180. When he first came into office, he went to China. He asked them for money. He said he wasn't concerned about the Spratly Islands, where China has been filling in reefs to create what appears to be a military base. But yesterday, he went to send off ships of the Philippine Navy in Manila to head to the Spratlys, where he has told them to plant trees and to turn some of the little shoals that the Philippines claims as their own into islands like China has. And I don't know what his motives are. He's a very strange man. Also, this could be good timing or bad timing, but the FBI yesterday busted a group here in California that facilitates the sale of green cards. Now, this is fully legal. It's the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program. I've always objected to it. I don't think you should be able to buy citizenship in the United States. It invites criminals to come here because they can afford to buy a green card. But yesterday in the San Gabriel Valley, the California Investment Immigration Fund was busted. And I don't know if this was to embarrass Xi Jinping or it just was coincidence, but that's how it happened. The New York Times has a front pager on Friday that details the palace intrigue and the political infighting at the Trump White House. And the two big wrestlers are Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law. And this week, it's been quite a show. We know Bannon was bounced from the National Security Council. We know that Jared went to Iraq for a high profile. And all over the media this week, there were these gushing portraits of Jared Kushner. I almost gagged. At any rate, Trump himself has apparently been dismissive of, he scorned the coverage of Kushner's recent high-profile trip to Iraq. And at other points, he's been dismissive of Steve Bannon, curtly telling him he is not needed at this particular meeting or that one. Then there's the Reince Priebus angle, where Trump repeatedly asks people whether he's doing a good job or not, and he appears to do this to keep people off base. But it's creating a spate of leaks, most of which are attributed to Kushner and to Bannon. Oh, by the way, Neil Gorsuch was confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. He's 49 years old, and this right-wing nut will be there for the rest of my life, if not yours. Hillary Clinton spoke in New York yesterday. She blamed Russia and misogynist Americans for her political loss in November. And I'll leave it to others to analyze that part. What delighted me is that she told Nick Kristof of the New York Times, who interviewed her, she was asked if she might run for mayor of New York City. And she said, "I have a lot of work to do. I don't think that will include ever running for office again." Let's hold her to that. I know there are a lot of people who just love Hillary and they want her to come back. It's over, friends. Please, give it up. Here in San Francisco, Twitter resisted a demand from the Department of Homeland Security that it expose the people who have secret Twitter accounts at government agencies and the one that was purported to be in the White House. And today, the Department of Homeland Security withdrew its demand. In Alabama, the LoveGov is facing impeachment as soon as next week. Robert Bentley, who's been embroiled in a controversy over a relationship with a top assistant, has been investigated by the Ethics Commission in Alabama. Isn't that a joke? And they interviewed 45 witnesses, 33,000 documents, and the news article here in the New York Times doesn't mention how he used state resources to try to shut down independent journalists like my friend Roger Schuler at the Legal Schnauzer blog. And finally, here in California, Jerry Brown paid off some legislators in the grand political tradition yesterday to get the minimum number of votes he needed, a two-thirds majority in each house, to pass an ambitious $52 billion package to fix California's potholes over the next 10 years. And I am happy about that. Thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast. I appreciate that you listen, and I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.